For over 30 years, South Korea's Navy has dreamed of sailing nuclear-powered submarines. In 2025, Washington publicly said yes for the first time. On the surface, the headline looks simple: an ally gains stronger defenses. Beneath it lies a dense web of treaties, fuel politics, and distrust. At a high-profile U.S. rock summit, a joint fact sheet declared that Washington supports Seoul's plan to build nuclear-powered attack submarines. For the first time, approval was written into an official document, promising cooperation on fuel arrangements and shipbuilding requirements. But paper is not steel. A sentence in a communiqué does not automatically become a reactor core, trained crews, and a submarine sliding into the sea. In the early 2000s, an earlier Korean nuclear submarine project was quietly shelved after U.S. opposition and regional worries about proliferation. 2 decades later, Washington's calculation has changed. The same ally that once said no now sees Korean nuclear submarines as useful pieces on the Indo-Pacific board, and some analysts describe this as part of a slow maritime encirclement of China. The United States no longer thinks only about deterring North Korea. It is planning for potential crises with China across the wider Indo-Pacific, from the East China Sea to the South China Sea, a chain of allies that many in Beijing interpret as encirclement. Inside South Korea, many headlines celebrated the deal as a breakthrough, the birth of a blue water navy and entry into the nuclear submarine club. Supporters call it a strategic turning point, proof that Korea is no longer just a frontline shield, but an emerging maritime power with global reach. Yet one basic question is often skipped in the celebration: why did the United States hold the power to say yes or no over Korea's submarine plans at all? The real story begins not in a shipyard but in a treaty room, where nuclear cooperation agreements define who may enrich uranium and under what conditions. Long before anyone talked about submarines, those agreements gave Washington quiet leverage over Seoul's nuclear fuel cycle and any future naval reactor. This film follows 4 questions: why the U.S. holds a veto, what SSNs change militarily, how neighbors react, and whether bending nuclear rules can ever be safe. To answer them, we must walk from diplomatic signatures to steel hulls, from deep ocean patrols to the thin ice of nuclear norms. In 1974, Seoul and Washington signed a nuclear cooperation agreement that locked South Korea's nuclear program into strictly peaceful uses. Under this 123 agreement, South Korea pledged not to use U.S.-origin nuclear material for weapons and to accept strict safeguards on its reactors and fuel. The agreement also means Seoul cannot enrich uranium or reprocess spent fuel without explicit U.S. consent, even at low civilian levels. In 2015, after long negotiations, the treaty was revised to create a high-level commission and explore limited low enrichment under U.S. oversight. Even producing low-enriched uranium below 20% requires prior consultation and written agreement under this framework. Naval reactors use the same material that can, in theory, power nuclear weapons, making submarine fuel one of the most sensitive transfers on Earth. Many existing nuclear submarines run on highly enriched uranium above 90%, fuel that is only a step away from weapons grade. Only a few states can design, fuel, and maintain naval reactors. South Korea's nuclear industry is advanced, but key fuel and technologies are imported. Korean firms build power reactors worldwide, yet the country remains dependent on U.S. policy when it comes to enrichment, reprocessing, and naval reactor fuel. That dependence gives Washington enormous leverage. Without a U.S.-approved fuel chain, any Korean nuclear submarine plan risks becoming a very expensive empty hull. The recent joint fact sheet promises cooperation on fuel avenues, signaling that Washington is willing, in principle, to unlock that padlock for Seoul. But this is still a conditional green light. Any concrete fuel deal must pass U.S. law, congressional scrutiny, and non-proliferation policy tests. Korean media emphasize approval and rights, while skeptics point to the fine print. Actual enrichment and reprocessing remain tightly controlled by Washington. If politics turn or trust erodes, fuel deliveries could be delayed or stopped, leaving partially built submarines or idle hulls tied to the pier. The power of a nuclear submarine begins long before the turbine spins. It begins in a treaty that decides who controls the fuel. Compared to diesel-electric boats, nuclear-powered submarines can stay submerged almost indefinitely and sprint at high speed without worrying about batteries or air. Endurance is power. A nuclear submarine can lurk silently for months, turning the depth of the ocean into both shield and hunting ground. To shadow a hostile ballistic missile submarine for days, your own boat must be faster, quieter, and able to stay far from home waters. North Korea is developing submarines capable of launching nuclear-capable ballistic missiles, turning nearby waters into potential launch platforms. In war games, Korean nuclear submarines stalk these North Korean boats, ready to track or, if necessary, destroy them before they can fire. South Korea's KSS-3 submarines already carry vertical launch cells and air-independent propulsion, but their endurance still falls short of nuclear propulsion. Nuclear propulsion would move the Korean Navy from coastal defense into true blue water operations across the Philippine and South China Seas, forming one more link in a long arc of Allied forces around China's maritime approaches. Analysts imagine Korean nuclear submarines quietly linking with U.S. and Japanese anti-submarine networks, forming an invisible undersea wall that, to critics in China, looks like a ring of containment. In that picture, Korea's boats would not just shadow the North. They would help monitor Chinese and Russian submarines moving between oceans, tightening what some commentators call a strategic noose around China's key sea lanes. The undersea environment is the most opaque part of warfare. Misread sonar contacts and aggressive maneuvers can quickly turn shadow games into crises. Nuclear submarines are also about power projection, the ability to appear without warning along distant coasts and then disappear again into the deep. For nuclear-armed states, submarines mean second strike capability. Korean boats would not carry nuclear warheads, but they operate in the same logic of survivable deterrence. Owning nuclear-powered submarines is a status symbol. It signals that Korea's Navy belongs among the world's most advanced forces. For decades, South Korea was seen mainly as a shield on land. Nuclear submarines would mark a shift to an active maritime security actor. Every new nuclear submarine in East Asian waters subtly shifts the undersea balance, making the domain more crowded and politically charged. North Korea condemned the summit as a confrontation declaration, warning that U.S.-backed Korean nuclear submarines will ignite a new nuclear domino. Such rhetoric gives Pyongyang a ready excuse to accelerate its own nuclear submarine and SLBM programs, insisting it is merely responding to Allied escalation. North Korean media already call South Korea a quasi-nuclear state under U.S. protection, framing the submarine deal as proof that Seoul is crossing a nuclear line. Beijing has expressed concern that Korean nuclear submarines touch directly on regional stability and the integrity of the non-proliferation regime, and feed what it sees as a U.S.-led encirclement strategy along China's coasts. From Beijing's perspective, Allied nuclear submarines near its coasts look less like defense and more like an undersea encirclement of its fleets and sea lanes. China and Russia rely on protected bastion areas for their missile submarines. Allied SSNs operating nearby could threaten those sanctuaries in a crisis. Japan is already studying next-generation submarine propulsion. Some voices in Tokyo say that if Korea gets nuclear boats, Japan must not fall behind. In Tokyo, hawks emphasize deterrence against China, while critics warn that flirting with nuclear propulsion could inflame suspicion at home and abroad. Russia, suspected of aiding parts of North Korea's submarine program, watches warily as U.S. allies strengthen their undersea forces near its Pacific approaches. Within the United States, some see the deal as smart burden sharing. Others worry it stretches nuclear rules too far and risks a backlash at the IAEA. The result is a triangular dynamic. What Seoul calls deterrence, Tokyo calls catching up, and Beijing and Pyongyang label a hostile undersea alliance. Every side claims its moves are defensive. Yet together, these defenses make East Asian oceans more crowded, opaque, and prone to miscalculation. Online, citizens argue in real time, some celebrating stronger shields, others fearing that one misstep between submarines could drag millions into war. Globally, the AUKUS deal for Australia and now the Korean case fuel talk of a broader undersea arms race among allies and rivals alike. As the hardware spreads, attention turns to the rules. Can the nuclear order handle more naval reactors without opening a backdoor to weapons programs? All of this unfolds under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which divides the world into nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear states with strict obligations. Non-nuclear states like South Korea accept IAEA safeguards so the world can verify that nuclear material is not diverted into weapons. Zone, the naval loophole, which allows states to remove material from safeguards for non-explosive military uses like submarine fuel. Arms control experts warn that this loophole could be abused by states claiming submarine projects while secretly edging closer to a bomb. When the US, UK, and Australia announced AUKUS nuclear submarines, diplomats worried it might normalize using the naval loophole for friendly states. Advocates argue that robust safeguards can still work, but critics say every exception chips away at the clarity that keeps the regime legitimate. Some now see South Korea as AUKUS 2.0, a test of how far nuclear rules can be bent for allies while claiming that non-proliferation remains intact. Seoul signals it could use low-enriched uranium in its submarines to ease weapons concerns, but skeptics say symbolism matters more than the percentage. The IAEA now faces a complex task: monitoring naval fuel without exposing sensitive military information or weakening safeguards elsewhere. Countries in the global south ask whether powerful allies get exceptions that others never could, deepening a sense of double standards in the nuclear order. If Australia and Korea can use the naval loophole, others may someday argue they deserve the same. From past cases to future unknowns, step by step the distinction between rules and exceptions grows blurred, not by one dramatic breach but by friendly accommodations. Legally, nuclear submarines without nuclear warheads can fit inside the NPT. The question is whether repeated exceptions erode the regime's legitimacy. Any non-nuclear state operating nuclear submarines walks on thin ice, legally allowed yet constantly tested by international suspicion. The dilemma is sharp. Can nuclear order adapt without being hollowed out, or will special cases slowly turn rules into rhetoric? Inside South Korea, the nuclear submarine debate splits opinion. Admirals and defense firms on one side, fiscal hawks and arms control advocates on the other. Supporters argue that surrounded by nuclear-armed neighbors and submarines, Korea cannot rely forever on borrowed deterrence from American fleets alone. For many, nuclear submarines also symbolize national pride, proof that Korea is not just a manufacturer but a rule-maker in regional security. Opponents point to the price tag. Each boat costs billions and demands decades of maintenance, money that could fund drones, cyber defense, or social welfare instead. Beyond money, there are technical hurdles: designing compact naval reactors, training nuclear-qualified crews, and building safe bases for accidents and waste. The history of nuclear submarines includes deadly accidents and radiation leaks. One undersea disaster could scar Korean society for generations. If fuel deals stall or politics shift, Korea could be left with half-built hulls and sunk costs, repeating ambitious projects that died midstream. The submarine debate interacts with a separate question: should South Korea ever pursue its own nuclear weapons or rely permanently on the U.S. umbrella? Polls show many Koreans support nuclear weapons in principle yet also fear isolation and sanctions. Nuclear submarines look like a middle path that still changes perceptions. At heart, the issue is not just hardware but fairness. Can security for some be built by bending rules that were supposed to bind everyone equally, especially when that security takes the shape of a tightening ring around a single rival state? In the best case, Korea's submarines operate under strict transparency, reinforce alliance deterrence, and encourage neighbors to respect agreed limits in return. In the worst case, they accelerate an undersea arms race, fuel suspicion of secret ambitions, and raise the chance of crisis or accident in crowded waters. Legally, South Korea's nuclear submarine path can fit inside today's rules. Politically, it rests on fragile trust in diplomacy and non-proliferation norms. The undersea chessboard of Northeast Asia is being rearranged. Korea is no longer just a square on that board. It is becoming one of the players in a game that many describe as a slow-motion encirclement of China. In the end, one question remains: when powerful states bend nuclear rules for their friends, does that make the world safer or simply more complicated and unfair?